Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left.
How's it going on a Friday?
The storms we chase.
It's nice outside. It's a Friday, working towards the weekend. Thank you so much for joining us on the JMULL Show, part of the 110 Sports Network, 110 Sports Live, 110sportsmedia.com/live, or on Twitch at twitch.tv/the JMULL Show. Thank you so much for joining us on a Friday. We got a lot to get to. It's been a busy week in sports. It really has been a busy week in sports. We're going to, at 11:20, our very own Josh Doering of Touchline Talk is going to come hop on the show to talk some soccer with us. MLS is back. For those of you who don't know, Josh is a huge MLS guy. And if you're not watching Touchline Talk, you're just doing it wrong. But we'll get to the MLS is back tournament, the Champions League draw earlier today. We'll get to all of those things, FC Dallas, Nashville SC. We're gonna catch up on soccer. After that, we're gonna do the Podium. Stick around, see what the Podium is. Basically, a gold, silver, and bronze in some random topic. We do it every Friday, and we're gonna do it on this Friday. It's a very personal one. Very personal one, and it has nothing to do with sports. I'm excited about it. Let's just say it has something to do with one of the more popular TV shows ever. But we'll get to that at 11:40, and then we'll do FYI and get out of here. Like I said, Josh Doering at 11:20 or so. But I want to start with the biggest news of the last couple of days, or one of the biggest pieces of information in the last couple of days, and that's the Ivy League has ruled out all fall sports as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. They announced on Wednesday it's becoming the first Division I conference to say it will not hold sports this upcoming semester because of the coronavirus pandemic. I think there was going to be somebody who gets the ball rolling, and of course it's the Ivy League, because the Ivy League just has their priorities in line. But with that being said, it's certainly easier and this is sort of the bulk of the conversation, it's a lot easier for them from a financial perspective to have their priorities in line. Because of course the main focus should be keeping student athletes safe and healthy. And I think the closer and closer we get to the beginning of what would have been the beginning of the fall sports season for college athletics, as we get closer and closer to that, it's becoming more and more obvious that it's going to be almost impossible to do that and keep student athletes safe. It's going to be really hard to just have kids on campus, just any kids, and keep people safe. My sister has no roommate, so she's living alone, which there's of course some pros and cons to that, but the logistics of keeping students on a college campus safe this fall are almost impossible and just sort of daunting to think about. And then when you add in travel and teams being as close as they are to each other and spending as much time as they are with each other, but they're not existing exclusively, and they're not existing completely disconnected from the rest of the campus, which is really why the Ivy League made this decision, because they've been very clear on the fact that this is a decision made based on the existing policies that the presidents of their universities have put into place over the last couple of weeks. And, clearly student athletes aren't as close to student athletes on some campuses, but they've made it very clear that athletes and athletics will operate under the same rules that the rest of the campus does and the rest of the state does. There's still some places where, and it should be like this, but there are a lot of places where 25 people in a gathering is the most you can have, and last time I checked, a football team has a few more than 25 people. So in theory, that is a violation of the policy of the state and as a result, a policy violation when it comes to the university. And so it's just not possible. They came to the realization that it's just not possible to have competition this fall. Also, I love that the executive director of the Ivy League was on with Golica Wingo yesterday morning, and she kept calling it competition. I just love that. I don't know. There's something about using that word rather than games or sports or some other place filler that would have done the exact same thing. I don't know. I fancy the use of the word competition instead. But, I think this is going to be a little different than what we saw back in March when Ivy League sort of got the ball rolling with the rest of the country and the rest of the conferences in terms of canceling men's college basketball conference tournaments. Because the Ivy League was the first to do it. They didn't even go to fans, no fans in the stands. They just canceled it. And Ivy League coaches were upset about that. But then, that was the weekend before sort of the world ended. On March 11th was the day that Rudy Gobert tested positive for COVID-19 and basically shut down the entire sports world in 24 hours. And basically every conference tournament had been canceled by the end of the day on March 12th. That the weekend prior, the Ivy League canceled their tournament due to COVID-19, and and conferences pretty quickly followed suit. And it wasn't just, it was pretty quickly, it wasn't just no fans, it was pretty quickly, okay, no fans, but this is not going to be able to be done safely. We're just canceling our entire tournament. And then, of course, the entire world shut down, no NCAA tournament, and we all know the story from there. But this is a little different from the point that I'm not sure this will directly foreshadow how the rest of Division I conferences and schools deal with the idea of not playing fall sports. And here's why. The Ivy League was very clear that they couldn't come up with a way to do this safely for their student athletes, which is, and like I said, the campus operation rules, the policies that are put in place also are there in place for athletics. And they've said that teams will actually be able to meet and practice, especially for teams that, have a fall season and a spring season. You have golf, basketball, which technically would start in the fall semester. And as far as my understanding is, they won't be actually able to play until the end of the first semester. So even if the majority of the college basketball season takes place in the second semester, it basically is taking out the possibility of any non-conference. And I think that we're probably going to get to a point where the plan for the college basketball season is to start after January 1st with conference games and then play through the NCAA tournament. Now, whether we actually get to that point we're not super close to that point in terms of actually hearing that decision, but I would be surprised if we don't get something like that, for the same reason that the Big Ten has decided that they're going to play conference games only, as well as the Pac-12 is expected to do the same thing to decrease the amount of travel. And, conferences are typically in a relatively similar geographical region. There are some exceptions to that rule. I mean, Creighton is all the way out in Omaha, Nebraska, and they play St. John's. They play in the same conference as St. John's, which is way out in Queens. So it's certainly not quite that simple, but it at least it decreases some of those things. I mean, a couple of years ago, my school, Butler, flew all the way down to Florida to play in Gainesville, and so that kind of thing can be avoided. But that's neither here nor there right now. But I think it's going to be a lot harder for Power 5 schools and really any school that basically gets their entire athletic program budget from the money that football makes. It's going to be a lot harder for them to come to terms with the fact that this is not possible. It really just isn't. And I think we're going to see it with baseball. I think we're going to see it with the NFL if it actually happens. But I think we're going to see that it's impossible to do this while traveling. I really think it's going to be incredibly difficult to do it. I think, most of the NBA is now in the bubble in Orlando. We're now July 10th. We're getting close to that, and most of the teams and the players are in Orlando. The MLS is in Orlando as well at the ESPN Worldwide of Sports Complex. Wide World of Sports Complex. And I honestly think that, they get rid of FC Dallas and they get rid of Nashville SC, who had 19 cases in between the two of them. And I think really that they're going to be able to contain this pretty easily. I think this is the conclusion that I've kind of come to, is that if you get rid of, and I think MLS really has approached this the right way, and we'll talk to Josh about this in 10 minutes or so. But they got rid of the team that is the sort of the epicenter of the cases in MLS, the two teams, 19 cases between two teams. And all of a sudden, you've got very few cases. You've got they don't have to go anywhere. They're all in their, version of the bubble. And there's a safety that they just, the players undoubtedly just feel safer now as a result. So the point is I think we're going to get to the point where even if you're traveling geographically close to wherever your home, wherever your school is, wherever your campus is, it's going to be so hard to really keep track of and keep players from testing positive, especially if you're getting on planes or even on buses for 6 hours and you're in the same space. I mean, more and more stuff comes out every day about the aerosol transmission of COVID-19. But what makes this so much harder for Power 5 schools than it does for the Ivy League is the Ivy League loses money from their football programs. Every Ivy League school loses money from their football programs. So from a financial perspective, they're actually helping their athletic program, and by, as a byproduct, helping the other smaller sports, not as popular sports, whatever term you want to use, as a result. That's not the case for Power 5 schools, because the secret here is that college athletics for most schools is risky business and not something that's all that lucrative, especially like even SEC schools. Like they're not, like their golf teams aren't making money for them. Their swimming teams, their baseball and softball teams aren't making all that much money. I mean, baseball might be getting there and softball might be getting there, but the point is that SEC schools are able to finance and build incredible facilities and give all of their teams resources because of the budget that is created by the revenue that football makes. Ohio State football makes hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Hundreds. And that doesn't just go straight back into the football program. That goes straight back into the athletic program. And then you have the money to run these other programs. And this is why it's so much more difficult of a decision for Power 5 schools and these schools who really depend on those football programs. And we can say what we want about how much money is in it and whether that's right or wrong. I think it's a different conversation, because right now it just is the way that it is. Like, that's just the way it is. And whether it's right or wrong or you agree with it or not, it's how athletic programs do what they do, especially at the Power 5 level, is they reap the benefits of those TV deals, and every time they're on ESPN, and every time their conference is on ESPN, and every time their conference wins a national championship or goes to the college football playoff or wins a bowl game or is just part of a bowl game, every time, that's that's where they're getting their money. I mean, one of the best things for a conference is for a team in your conference to win the national championship, at least from a basketball perspective. The amount of money that Villanova itself has made for the Big East over the last couple of years, over the last handful of years since 2016 is a little ridiculous, because of how much success and how much they benefit financially from going as deep into the NCAA tournament and winning the NCAA tournament like they have with alarming regularity over the last 4 years. In theory, it would have been silly to bet against Villanova because they won in 16, they won in 18. So like the Giants earlier in this decade, they should win. They should have won this year too, right? But it's why when the Ivy League, because I guarantee you that the SEC, the ACC, the Big 12, the Big 10, they've all come to the same conclusion that the Ivy League has, that it's probably not the best idea, that it isn't the best idea. But the difference between Ivy League and a Power 5 school is the Ivy League knows that they aren't losing anything. They're actually gaining from not playing football, which is really great for them and really great for, Ivy League schools are not hurting for endowments or money. And that's, part of the reason it's a little ridiculous that Harvard is making students pay full tuition to go out to online classes, but that's a different conversation. Power 5 athletic programs, though, need football. And you've already seen, Stanford, who had more sports than anybody had more sports in their athletic program than anybody in the country, just dropped 11 sports. And if football doesn't happen, and it could be a result of them assuming that football isn't going to happen, but if football doesn't happen, then there's probably going to be more. And there will be schools who, if football doesn't happen, there'll be schools who, have to drop their football program because football's expensive and football loses money for a lot of schools. A lot of, smaller schools that aren't on, nobody's arguing that Ohio State doesn't make a lot of money from their football program. That's the whole point of this conversation. But the point is that you're going to see a lot of football programs die, relatively speaking, and you're going to see a lot of just other sports die if they're not getting the money and the budget that they would usually get from the money that their college football team brings in. I think we're going to get to a point where whether it takes an entire team getting COVID-19 or something, drastic, and hopefully something that never happens, it might take that, but I think we're going to get to the point where there's very little college football this fall because it's just logistically impossible to pull off with student athletes being intermingled with regular students on campus, regular students who aren't athletes on campus, going to class, living in dorms, socializing. No matter what you tell them to do, they're going to socialize. It's just going to happen. And that's just the reality of the situation. But we've already seen spread around summer workouts, and there's no reason to suggest that it's not going to happen when you put everybody on campus in the fall. And in fact, there's an argument that it happens to an even larger extent, which is alarming, considering how bad it looked when college football teams started getting back together, a couple weeks ago. So I think I think that all Power 5 schools are going to come to the same conclusion eventually, but the financial impact is why it's going to be different than it is for the Ivy League, who can come to this decision and know that it's not going to hurt them financially nearly as much as not having football is going to hurt some of these Power 5 schools financially. But we shall see. The Ivy League being the first to do something again and really laying the groundwork, and we'll see if the momentum picks up the way that it did in March. But coming up next, we're going to talk to Josh Doering about the MLS's back tournament, the UEFA Champions League draw, and all things soccer. That's coming up next on the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. We're back on the JMULL Show on a Friday. It's a very nice Friday. Working towards the weekend, all of those cliches. But before we get to the weekend, we need to talk some MLS's back tournament, some soccer in general. And to do that, there's no better person to call than Josh Doering, the host of Touchline Talk, Tuesdays and Thursdays on the 110 Sports Network from 11 a.m. Eastern to 12 p.m. But it's Josh Doering. He's here to talk to us all things soccer. Josh, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you, Josh?
I'm doing pretty well. You know, we're almost to the end of the week, and that's a good thing. And what's an even better thing, especially for you, a lover of soccer, and more in particular, a lover of what you dub the most interesting league in this country, that being the MLS, is back in action. How happy are you that we've got the MLS back in this country?
Oh, I'm just thrilled. I just love this league because it's so unpredictable. It has the very American, playoff system, and the fact that you don't always have the best team win, and there's a March Madness like feel to it. And now you combine that with the fact that this is a World Cup style tournament. It's just tremendous. I'm very excited.
World Cup style tournament, is that the best way to do this? How do you feel about this? This idea and I'm actually a huge fan of it. This idea to start with a tournament to get hype. I think it's a little easier to get people excited for a tournament, to market for a tournament, rather than just the beginning of the season. How do you feel about the way that the league decided to come back in this sort of tournament format?
Yeah, I think it was a really good decision for a couple reasons. One, going into a bubble allowed you to get back fast, and for a league like this in particular, that was incredibly important to be there before the NBA, before Major League Baseball, so that if you want to watch live sports in this country, you're watching soccer, whether that's NWSL or MLS. Mm-hmm. And part of my concern when I first heard that this was potentially happening was how you make up the regular season games and sort of deal with that aspect of it. But I love the idea of just taking the group stage games and saying those count, and then obviously when teams get eliminated, then the games no longer count for the regular season. But you're playing 3 regular season games, and then you're also getting the tournament elimination knockout aspect of it, which is always interesting. So I think they did the best possible thing considering the circumstances.
Does that get a little more tricky when what happens to FC Dallas and Nashville happens? Of course, they've 19 cases combined between the two of them, so both teams basically being eliminated eliminated in the tournament basically by themselves and by COVID-19. Does it get a little trickier when it comes to that? And as an extension, how do you feel the league handled those cases from those two clubs and getting them out of the tournament?
Yeah, I don't think it's a massive deal in terms of the scheduling. You're going to have to redo the schedule anyway, so you just figure out how to fit those 3 extra games in, assuming they do go back and play the rest of the regular season. And from a handling the case perspective, this is something that we were talking about on our podcast yesterday about the NBA that MLS did a really good job of. Is, yes, it looks terrifying when you have 19 cases on 2 teams, and players were rightfully scared because of that, but they caught all of those cases right when they got to the bubble, when they came off the airplanes. So they were able to isolate those teams, quarantine those players, so that those guys didn't have interaction with the rest of the league. So all of a sudden, now that those 2 teams are out, players feel a lot safer, and the danger is obviously still there, but it's a less prominent threat just because the people that were going to transmit it are now completely quarantined, and they didn't have that interaction. So you don't have all of these guys who you were rubbing shoulders with, these guys who ended up testing positive, and now you don't know who might test positive 5 days later. They did a really good job of handling it, considering the danger that was there, because that's something you haven't seen in Europe, and you haven't really seen in any other league. It's teams, with the exception of Orlando and the NWSL, teams where you've got, a solid third half of your roster is testing positive, and there's just no way you can play. So I was very pleased with the way they handled the situation, given how dangerous it was at, a week or 2 ago.
Yeah, I think this is an overlooked, not issue, but an overlooked component of all of this, is how you deal with that kind of thing happening, if an entire team testing positive, because in the NBA right now it's certainly a COVID-19 is sort of being thought of as the same as an ankle twist that keeps you out for a couple weeks, and I think there's certainly some merit in trying to approach it that way just from a getting the season done perspective. But what if an entire team tests positive for 2 weeks in the middle of the NBA playoffs, and it would seem like the best thing to keep everybody safe is to tell that team sorry, but it definitely gets a little hairier once you are actually in the playoffs and with a sport like basketball. You've got two teams with a total of 19 positive cases, and as of yesterday, the Premier League had seen 19 positive cases total. So the question is twofold. First, is that more of a result of the fact that European countries just handled this better than this country did, and that's just a byproduct of it? Or is it more of the way that the EPL actually implemented their policies and things compared to the MLS? And just in general, how would you compare the success of the MLS's return to the return of the EPL?
Yeah, to me, it is very much about the way that the countries are handling it and the way that Europe has been able to really get ahead of this and stay diligent in keeping ahead of it, where you're not seeing the ridiculous amount of new cases popping up like we are here in the U.S. And so then obviously just the amount of people you interact with is much, there's just not as much danger there because you don't have thousands of people testing positive every day. So to me, it's very much about the environment that the players are in, just from a cultural, societal standpoint. And the other thing too is that, MLS had to go into a bubble to make this happen and to take their players out of society essentially and create this own universe inside Disney. And the Premier League was very much, we are not going to these neutral venues. We are not compromising the integrity of our schedules because you play everybody home and home, and that's just how it works. So it was not going to happen if it didn't happen at home grounds, with potentially an exception here or there. And so that's part of it too, is that these players have been, they're not quarantined anywhere, but because they're taking care of it. In the last round of testing, there were 0 positive results, which is just incredible to think about.
It really is.
That the integrity of, and you don't have any major players who have backed out, which of course they have every right to considering the circumstances, but you got to a point where players feel really safe and continue to feel safe because everybody, both inside the Premier League and outside of it, are being diligent, and that's just unfortunately not the world we're living here in the U.S.
Right. I think that certainly opens up the options that the EPL has because they feel safe in their country, which I think is something that can't be said for this country right now. Are you worried about what might happen after this tournament is over? And to my understanding, the plan right now, at least, is to try and play on home fields and in home stadiums after this tournament is over. Are you worried that just might spell trouble? Would you rather them just stick around in the bubble, even if it's, you get a couple week break just to, see your family, and then you come back to the bubble and start playing in the bubble in the same manner? Are you cool with the moving around the country once the regular season gets underway?
From a safety standpoint, I would much rather them be in a bubble, but I just don't think there's any way in the world that's going to happen. Players are not going to say, we're going to go play an entire season in Orlando. And that's sort of the unique situation that MLS and baseball have found themselves in compared to an NBA, where NBA is just finishing a season. MLS was 2 games in when COVID happened. So I think I'm skeptical they're actually going to be able to finish the season, just like, you've talked about the issues that baseball is having, and we're both skeptical of the NBA, and football has its own problems already, and we're not even to, preseason potentially yet. So I'm skeptical of finishing a regular season just like any other sport. I just don't see any way which the solution and players agree to go play that season in Orlando, even if it is safer.
Right. So, yeah, there's certainly a lot to juggle in the air, and I think, honestly, at least at this point, that we're to the point where MLS is sort of in the clear to a point. Because in theory, if you're in a bubble and you get everybody to the bubble and you take out the epicenter, like the two teams that tested positive a bunch, that in theory this can go on pretty nicely without too much, too many overwhelming number of positive cases. But we'll see. The other thing I want to talk about with you is, so apart from the NWSL, this is, and it's been incorrectly reported all over the place that this is the first professional sports team sport back in the country, and you and I know that that's certainly not the case. But it is the first team sport that is being televised on the biggest networks in the country on a consistent basis. And what that brings is sort of an interesting discussion on and a viewing of how the MLS and its teams are choosing to partake in the movement for social equality, for Black Lives Matter, and things of that nature. What was your reaction to first the way Orlando and Inter Miami showed support in the first game back, and then just your general reaction of how teams, you said that the Philadelphia Union did something that was pretty cool as well. What's your reaction been to how the MLS has approached that part of this that every league is having to consider?
Yeah, I think MLS deserves credit for basically just handing the reins to its players and saying, you can do whatever you want with this platform and this moment. All of this stuff pretty much has come through this new organization, Black Players for Change, which is across the league initiative of Black players from all these teams, which is why you saw in the demonstration before the first game back, all of those players who were going around raising their fists, those were players from other teams that wanted to participate in this. And this was very much player-driven, which I think is really cool, and sort of reminds me of the NBA in a sense, where the players just said, this is what we want to do. And I also think that part of it is interesting just from the aspect of the national anthem discussion too, and this idea that I understand the value and symbolism of having a national anthem to kneel for or to protest in some way. But I also think there's a way to send an incredibly powerful message without the national anthem, which is what you saw MLS players organized. And then, right, you go past that, the Philadelphia Union didn't tell the league. Nobody really knew what was going to happen. And then they came out and displayed the back of their jerseys, paying homage to all of these victims of police brutality. And then last night you had Thierry Henry, who is French and played in MLS for a little while, but is not by any means ingrained in American culture. But he's a Black man who cares about this. So he spent the first 8 minutes and 46 seconds of their game kneeling as he coached his team. So you've seen different things across the league, but I've just been thrilled with, and I hope that it continues. I talked about this yesterday on my show, just, what happens from here? How does MLS continue to support this, both financially and sort of promotionally, to continue to give these players every resource possible to make a positive difference?
Yeah, I think one of the more interesting things to think about is just how it continues, because it's from, just as games, you get to the point where teams are playing multiple games. Will they do it to this extent most games? Will they not? Is certainly an interesting conversation as well. How do you feel about the quality of play? Does it look like you would expect the beginning of we're essentially just sort of at the beginning of a regular season, from a sort of freshness but also not super deep into the season perspective. Does the quality of play look up to par to you? Is there some timidness that you've seen, or are you pretty happy with that so far?
I'm pleasantly surprised, and right, it was always going to be less than ideal just because that's how it looks anytime you come out of an extended break, particularly when you don't have a preseason,
right,
to sort of get yourself into game shape and to get your 60 minutes in there and then your 75 and then go the full 90 a couple times. it's what you've seen across leagues. You're going to continue to see until teams have a couple games under their belt. The first half is not going to be pretty. There are not going to be a lot of goals scored in the first half.
Right.
But when you get into the second half, you've seen substitutions make an incredible difference, which really gives an advantage to teams that have depth and guys who can really make a difference from a creative perspective coming off their bench, that you can just provide something different. So you're going to, it happened in the Premier League, it happened in the Bundesliga. It's going to take a while for it to look like normal soccer again, which is the same with any season, like you said. I've been pleasantly surprised. It's definitely, not the most appealing soccer I've ever watched, but I don't find it repulsive or am frustrated with it in any way.
TV experience, good? Is it distracting that they're clearly just sort of on a field that looks like it should be surrounded by 12 other soccer games happening at the same time, or is it relatively unimpactful for you?
Yeah, but once you get sort of over the fact that it looks like this is a training inter-squad scrimmage,
right?
The actual broadcast itself, I'm really happy with. I think it's great that they put all these mics all over the place.
Yeah.
And if you can't listen to fans and get your traditional experience, why not let people listen to goalies yell at their team all game?
Yeah.
And to learn more about the interactions that happen on the field, because it's one of those things that it's hard for particularly a casual fan to understand just how much communication, and really anybody who hasn't played at the professional level, to understand how much communication goes on constantly.
Yeah.
So I think it's a different experience. It's providing just something else for fans, which is great when you're trying to build your brand. And I think it's also a great teaching tool for younger players and coaches to say, this is what it actually sounds like at the highest level when you're playing professionally. This is the amount of talking you have to do to be successful.
Right.
So I'm a huge fan of what ESPN's doing.
Yeah, definitely. I think even for fans in the arena or in the stadium, that they really don't understand how much talking there is, and it's certainly, one of the places that you might as well take advantage of it and try something, because you almost get a free pass as a sports league to try something new, because then your justification if it goes poorly is, well, we didn't have fans, we were just trying something else. The last thing I want to talk to you about before letting you go is, we got a UEFA Champions League draw. Give me your one-off reactions. I'm sure were you up at 5:34 a.m. when it was on Twitter, or did you awake to it like the rest of us, and what were your reactions?
Oh yeah, I got up for it. I woke up and then immediately went and looked at the bracket. I expect nothing else. My initial thought, yeah, I was not about to be up at 5:30 in the morning just for a Champions League draw. Games won't be played for another month or so. But the more I look at this, my reaction is I am incredibly excited to see what happens with Atalanta. I haven't lost January. They're not particularly good defensively, but they're the best team in the world, and they're playing PSG in the quarterfinals, which is a fascinating science experiment to me, because PSG will not have played a competitive game since before COVID because their league shut down.
Right.
And all of a sudden they're coming up against one of the most informed teams in the world. And then the other half of that bracket is Red Bull Leipzig, who just lost their best player to Chelsea, and Atletico Madrid, who are really good in this tournament but haven't had the most impressive season, and also lost their best player prior to this season, Antoine Griezmann. So I think there's a real chance that Atalanta could come out of that half of the bracket, which is absolutely crazy considering they're not even a traditionally top 5, top 6 team in Italy, let alone a top 8 team in the top 8, top 16 team in the world that could make a deep run. So that was what stood out to me. And then you also obviously have the potential of a Messi-Ronaldo matchup, which is always fun.
Right.
But to me, this is about Atalanta and the fact that this lined up perfectly for them. And at least, if nothing else, we're going to learn something about what happens when you have to play a bunch of games after a break and when you haven't played since March with that matchup with PSG. I just think it's fascinating science.
One of the most talked about things with all of the restarts, and I think this is a league that, isn't, this in particular, Champions League it's not quite the same conversation, but is will this Champions League winner be looked at the same as last year's Champions League winner from a historic perspective? Is there any reason to think of them differently? Like, inevitably whoever wins the NBA Finals this year will be thought of differently?
I think it really kind of depends on actually what happens, just because of the weird scenario you're in, where you've got teams in Italy and in England who are going to be playing through middle to end of this month, and in the thick of a title race, you're competing for qualifying for the Champions League next year or something. You have teams in Germany who just finished their season and are now taking a break and then going to come back, and then you have PSG who hasn't played since March. So I think for example, if PSG, who is better than Atalanta, comes out and just gets destroyed because they haven't played and they're at such a massive disadvantage, I think that's going to affect it. If we see a clear trend where either the teams that had a bunch of rest or the teams that have been playing consistently leading up to the resumption of the Champions League are just so much better than the other. But aside from that, if teams just come out and it's competitive and you don't notice that much of a difference between the different scenarios these teams are entering in, then I think it's basically going to be a typical Champions League. Most of these teams played with the exception of PSG. So I'm not overly concerned about the idea that this is going to be remembered. Obviously it's going to be different just because you're not playing it with fans, and it's you're going to one place to just sort of, it's not your traditional Champions League format, which I guess is also part of it. But the other thing I'll say too is it's not like there's a clear favorite or a team that should win this. It's wide open, so it's hard to say that anybody's going to get robbed because there's no real argument to say that this team absolutely should win. It's a wide open field, so that sort of plays into this as well, that it's just a nice wide open competition that you really can't expect anything. It's not like you have a lot of, your 1-16 upset in an NCAA tournament or something here.
Right.
It's just a bunch of fairly comparable teams that most of them aren't playing all that well at the given moment, with the exception of Bayern Munich, who are then going to have to take a 3-4 week break because they're done playing now. So I don't think it's going to matter that much. It's sort of in the same vein as the NBA for me, that of course it's going to be unique and it's going to be different, but at the end of the day, they got here in a normal environment, and you just sort of have to make the most of it. I don't think it's going to damage the reputation too much. Gotcha.
Josh, it's always a pleasure, and I'm constantly amazed by your level of understanding of the sport, basically all over the world. So thank you so much for your insights.
My pleasure. Anytime, Josh.
That's Josh Doering. Touchline Talk, 11 a.m. Eastern to 12 p.m. Eastern on the 110 Sports Network, 110sportsmedia.com. Touchline Talk Tuesdays and Thursdays, so his next show will be next Tuesday. But coming up next, we're actually just gonna wrap up the show. We got the Podium of the Best Friends episodes, because I've been watching a lot of Friends, and I feel very strongly about this. We're gonna talk about it, and then we'll just do FYI in the same segment before we get out of here for the weekend. You're watching the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. We're back on the JMULL Show on a Friday. Before we get to the podium real quick, I want to actually touch on something that Mr. J. Pavarsi on Twitter sending me a question that I really think is pretty interesting. He's talking about what will conferences going to conference games only do for a team like Notre Dame, who plays football independently. Focus, there we go. And who plays football independently? What will that do? And I think it's a really, really interesting question, because I really don't know, and I think that's one of those logistics that I would never think about. Like, what is Notre Dame going to do? I would assume that it's something that it would have something to do with regions, because I think the biggest issue when it comes to conference only games, not issue, but the biggest sort of motivator for that is the restrictions on travel and just trying to cut down on as much travel as possible. I think that could be a tough thing in some respects for Notre Dame, but also a good thing, because being in Indiana, so you start with the Indiana teams. I mean, you play IU, you play Purdue, maybe you get a bye game in there with Ball State, but then you can also play your games against teams like you go and play Illinois. That's in Urbana-Champaign. That's not the greatest game, but then you go to Ohio. You got Ohio State there. You can drive sort of around the lake there over to Michigan and play. You've got your Michigan State, your Michigans, but you also got some bye games there too with your Central Michigans and those type of teams. I think with those sort of surrounding, maybe you go down to Louisville and play Louisville, which is right there at the Indiana-Kentucky border. So I think like that would be my guess, and maybe it's just, and I don't actually know. I mean, we can look it up real quick, what the Notre Dame football schedule is, and we're gonna look it up real quick right now. So and we'll see. Maybe we'll look at this and think maybe they make exceptions. So you got Western, you got Navy and Arkansas, and you think maybe you skip those games, and then so you've got Western Michigan on September 19th, so you could play that one. Wisconsin, I think, is pretty good as well. You just sort of, South Bend fairly close to Chicago, and then Wisconsin, and I'm learning that, Wisconsin, I'm learning, is one of those places that I didn't have any real idea where it was geographically, but that it is pretty close. So I think maybe you could make that one happen. Stanford, of course, isn't going to happen. Maybe Pitt, probably not Duke, probably not Clemson, probably not Georgia. Maybe you play Louisville. So I think you could put a schedule together, and maybe you throw some other games in there, because of course there are going to be teams that lose some games as a result of conference play conference games only, and maybe you can put together just a schedule. Maybe you make Notre Dame an exception and they just play regional teams, because I think you can put together clearly a pretty solid schedule, and one that can really test the Fighting Irish if that is what it actually comes to. But that's a really great question, and something I hadn't really thought about. But yeah, really great question. The Podium, best Friends episodes. And listen, HBO Max is awesome, and we've got Friends back in my life. It was a long, dark. Yeah, I'm kidding. I don't have a dependency on Friends, but it is fun to watch, and of course, having that in quarantine is certainly not a bad thing at all. But I want to really quickly, there are some things that, some of the funniest parts and the most iconic parts of Friends are in episodes that just aren't all that spectacular. So, the pivot, everyone's heard of pivot. That episode's but it's really just funny when we're trying to pivot up the stairs with a couch that would never have gotten up the stairs. And I think there's some other examples to that as well. It's just funny instances. So these are the episodes that I think are the best, and it's my list, and I don't care. And most Friends episodes are good, so it doesn't really matter. In the bronze medal position, third place, the one with all the resolutions, and this one is carried by the fact that Ross is trying to do a new thing every day, and we've got leather pants. And it makes it even funnier. This is a great episode because it puts everybody in a weird position, because Ross does very little transforming throughout the course of Friends, in my opinion. And none of them, Chandler does the biggest because he, commitment to getting married. But, apart from, Ross doesn't change all that much. And he has this episode where he's trying all these different things and everyone's giving him crap for it. And the funny, he's, you got your pace pants, you make a pair of pace pants and she'll never know the difference. And so now it's a pair of black leather pants and he's got baby powder and lotion all over him. It's absolutely hilarious. And then with Chandler, talking about not making fun of people and not making jokes is also really, really funny. So that's the bronze medal. Silver medal, the one where everyone isn't ready. I really like episodes of just TV shows in general that put that where time is very much like they've got 25 minutes to get ready, and it's a 25-minute episode. So it's every second of the show is accounted for in the actual show. I'm a really big fan, and it's just hilarious. You've got, I'm wearing everything you own, and if I wasn't going commando, or the essence of the chair. There's some really great moments in that one as well. And then, of course, the drinking the fat, and Monica losing her mind over a voicemail is also funny. And then finally, in the one that I'll watch over and over again, is the one with the embryos, where they have a game show about who knows the other better. And the underrated part of this episode, first of all, the game part is hilarious. The underrated part of this episode, though, is the back half of it, when they're moving in. And then you've got the background of Phoebe and the embryos, which it's really funny that it's actually called the one with the embryos, because I don't remember it for that. Just pretty much everything else that goes on in the episode, but I could watch that one over and over again. But that's the podium, the Friends podium. I love it. But all jokes aside, that's the podium. Every Friday, I was watching Friends last night. Let's do it. And I was doing that thing where you look up, the funniest Friends episodes, and you go through and you just jump around. And so bring it to the JMULL show here on a Friday. That's pretty much all I have for you. Not a whole lot of FYIs going on in the sports world right now. So I don't have a whole lot for you there. Actually, Chris Brown, C Brown Sports, Around the Bases with Chris Brown, just tweeted out an update on COVID-19 testing from Major League Baseball. 11,149 samples, 83 positive tests, 71 players and 12 staff members have tested positive, with 28 different teams that have had at least one positive test. That's a lot of tests, and I think, there was a big hiccup from Major League Baseball this past weekend that really hurt them, and Chris and I talked about that on Wednesday. If you'd like to go and check out that show from Wednesday, please do over at 110sportsmedia.com. But I don't think that's horrible. 11,000 tests is a lot, and only 83 positive. I think the really big hurdle is when you actually start moving around, and that's going to be the first part. You've got the PGA Tour, but they're sort of moving in a bubble, like it's a moving bubble, and of course there's some fails the out loud test nature to that, but they're all moving in a bubble together. But there are some different people that are part of operations at every tournament, and so they've been traveling. This will be the first team sport where you're traveling a lot and being in a lot of different places in a short amount of time. So I think Major League Baseball, that's the next step for sure, is seeing just how is it possible to have a sport right now that moves around as much as baseball will move around, and still be able to keep tests this high and positive tests as low as 0.7%. But we'll see. I believe that's all I have for you today. We'll be back on Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern. Then we'll have Touchline Talk 11 a.m. Eastern on Tuesday. 11 a.m. Eastern on Tuesday with Touchline Talk. 1 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday with Around the Bases with Chris Brown. Check out everything on at 110sportsmedia.com. We have a newsletter now, so if you haven't subscribed to that yet, it's on the front page of 110sportsmedia.com. Put your email in there, and every Friday you'll get an email with basically all the content from the week where you can catch up on what we've been talking about over on the website. But I'll see you guys on Monday. Stay safe this weekend, and let's do it again at 11 a.m. on Monday.